The dust did not rise, it hung. It was the color of a fresh wound, a fine red powder that coated everything in dry cedar. It settled on the warped timbers of the new storefronts, silted the water troughs, and filmed the windows of the small, defiant church. This was the Arizona Territory, or perhaps New Mexico, in the year 1887. The border was a rumor, a line drawn on maps back east. But the drought was an absolute fact. The air was stretched thin and tight, like old leather. Eliza Hart stepped down from the rail car, tasting the grit on her teeth. Her lungs, accustomed to the damp, civilized air of Boston, felt brittle. She pulled her hat lower, securing the heavy wooden box camera slung over her shoulder. The camera was her shield and her weapon. It was the reason she had left a life of predictable comfort, the reason she was nearly 3,000 miles from a home that had tried to frame her in whalebone and silk. She was seeking freedom. She was seeking a voice. The Frontier Ledger paid her pennies for the truth. But her editor, Mr. Davies, wanted something else. His last letter, which she kept folded in her pocket, was specific. Find the missing railroad man, Miss Hart, but find the scandal behind him. Find something hot. We are not selling scenery. We are selling shocks. Eliza hated that word. Hot. It tasted like cheap whiskey and lies. She was here to document the expansion, the real lives, the cost of a nation moving west. But a man was missing, and that, at least, was a fact. From the high ridge overlooking the valley, Ashki Nez watched the train exhale its black smoke against the pale, tired sky. He saw the woman with the wooden box, another stranger, another mouth to feed in a land shrinking from the persistent lack of rain. Ashki was dying. He had worn the blue coat of the cavalry scouts for 2 winters. He had learned their tongue, learned the way they thought in straight lines and fences, learned how they broke the land instead of listening to it. He had left that life 2 years prior. The coat was burned. The memories were not. Now, his only duty was to the Red Willow Valley. His duty was to the spring that fed his family's horses, the horses that grazed freely in the high meadows, their coats shining even in the drought. He watched them now, a fluid motion of freedom. His duty was to the quiet stones that marked where his grandfathers rested. He held the leather reins of his stallion lightly. He did not need to pull. The horse understood his weight. Ashki understood the land, and the land was speaking of trouble. The spring was the heart of the valley. The railroad, and the town it spawned, was a knife pointed at that heart. He would not let them cut. He watched the woman with the box walk toward the center of the town, his face impassive, his gaze missing nothing. Dry cedar was 1 street wide and a mile long with ambition. Eliza walked the length of it, her boots sinking into the thick red powder. The ring of the blacksmith's hammer cut the air, sharp and constant. The man, broad-shouldered, paused his work to watch her pass. Men in dusty hats watched her from the shade of the general store. They were settlers, ranchers, prospectors, men whose faces were maps of sun and suspicion. She saw the conflict etched into the land itself. Barbed wire, new and cruel, sectioned off patches of dry scrub where sheep had once grazed. The cattlemen wanted the water, the sheepmen wanted the grass. The railroad, represented by a hastily built depot, wanted the right of way, and it did not care who it crushed. And just beyond the town's visible edge, unseen but felt, were the dying, the people, who had always been here and who were now being squeezed by the closing fist of the new world. Eliza sought lodging at the only hotel, a 2-story wooden structure that leaned slightly to the left, as if exhausted by the wind. The clerk looked at her camera, then at her face. "We do not have many ladies traveling alone," he said, his voice flat. "I am not traveling. I am working," Eliza replied, her voice clear. She signed the register. Her purpose was clear, even if her editor's was not. Find what happened to the worker. But Mr. Davies's words echoed, find something hot. Her integrity felt like a luxury she could not afford, yet it was the only thing she refused to sell. Later that day, Ashki knelt by the red willow spring. The water bubbled cool and clear from beneath a ledge of sandstone, a miracle in the parched land. He dipped his hand in, tracing the smooth stones. The level was steady. For now. This was the lifeblood. He looked toward the scarred earth where the railroad crews were blasting. They were close, too close. He had seen the surveyor's stakes. They planned to run the line straight through the edge of the valley. They would divert the water for their steam engines, leaving the valley, the horses, and the ancestors' graves to choke on the dust. His people avoided dry cedar. They avoided the white men's disputes, but the disputes were coming to them, carried on the steel rails. The water was not a political argument. It was life. Ashki would protect it. He rose, his movements silent, and melted back into the juniper and sandstone. He would watch. As evening approached, the heat barely relented. Eliza knew information was currency, and the only bank open was the saloon. She tidied her hair, secured her notebook, and left the camera in her locked room. A camera saw the truth, but it also invited trouble. She pushed open the swinging doors of the Last Chance saloon. The piano stopped. The murmur of voices died. Smoke, thick and blue, hung in the air, catching the last of the day's light. Every eye turned to her. Eliza ignored the stares, her gaze fixed on the wall behind the bar. It was cluttered with notices, wanted posters, and schedules. One sign, freshly painted, caught her eye. It was large, the letters crude but bold, designed to catch the desperate. Gold paid hard coin for startling news, information of a shocking nature. See the proprietor? Eliza felt a chill despite the stifling heat. It was an invitation to invention, a reward for rumor. This was how lies were born. She ordered a sarsaparilla, her back to the bar, listening. She was good at listening. It was the Indians. A man slurred, his voice loud enough to carry, "That railroad man. They took him, scalped him. I wager he was working too close to their cursed valley." "It is the water," another added, his voice rasping. "They'd kill to keep us away from it. They do not want progress." Eliza gripped her small notebook. She knew the difference between fact and fear. This town was confusing the two, and someone was paying gold to make the confusion worse. She saw the narrative Mr. Davies wanted laid out and easy. Savage natives murder innocent worker. It would sell papers from here to Chicago. It was hot. But Eliza thought of her heavy wooden camera resting in her room. It was a box built to capture light. To capture what was. It was not built to capture lies. She finished her drink and left the saloon, the red dust swirling around her ankles as the sun bled into the horizon. The truth was here, buried under assumptions and fear. She knew, with a sudden cold certainty, that digging it up would be dangerous. And she knew, just as certainly, that she was going to do it anyway. The moon was a sliver, offering just enough light to make the shadows in the railroad depot feel solid. It was past midnight, and dry cedar was locked in a silence that felt heavier than sleep. Eliza Hart could not rest. The sign in the saloon, the whispers of the missing worker, the tension she could taste in the dust. It all pulled her here. She moved between the stacks of lumber and canvas-covered freight, her wooden camera a heavy, awkward weight against her hip. She had come to photograph the depot itself, to document the artery of the new world, but she found herself moving like a hunter. A flicker of light. Eliza froze. It came from the far end of the yard, inside the half-built warehouse. It was not a lantern, but the small, hungry flicker of an open flame. She pressed herself against a stack of crates, the rough wood snagging her sleeve. She unlatched her camera case, her movements practiced and quiet. She extended the legs of the tripod, planting them silently in the dust. This was a risk. The magnesium flash would be a beacon, but the image might be worth it. A man was crouched by a small fire built inside a metal barrel. He was feeding pages from a thick ledger into the flames. He was built broad, wearing a cattleman's hat. As he reached for another book, his sleeve slid back. By the fire's own light, Eliza saw it, a tattoo, dark against his skin, etched onto the back of his hand and wrist. It was a stark, jagged lightning bolt. She centered the lens. Her hand was steady. She uncapped it, counting the seconds in her head. 1, 2, 3. The man looked up, not at her, but toward the entrance, as if sensing a sound she had not made. Eliza pressed the shutter. The world exploded in a silent, brilliant white flash. A puff of chemical smoke stung her nostrils. "Damn it!" the man yelled, kicking the barrel. Sparks and burning paper scattered. He drew his pistol, firing blind into the darkness where the flash had been. The bullet cracked into the wood just above Eliza's head, sending splinters into her hair. She did not wait. She grabbed her camera, collapsing the tripod as she ran, and scrambled back into the absolute darkness of the town's main street, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She did not look back. The next morning, the town awoke to a scream. It came from the direction of Red Willow Creek. Eliza grabbed her notebook and ran, joining the small, hurried crowd, heading toward the cottonwoods. He was floating face down in the shallowest part of the spring, snagged on a cluster of reeds. He wore the rough clothes of a railroad worker. When the blacksmith, Tom, and another man pulled him out, the crowd recoiled. "It is him," someone whispered. "The one who was missing." "Look at his head!" Another voice, louder, cut through the quiet. "Look!" The back of the man's head was a ruin of blood and bone. "Dine," a man in a dusty suit said, his voice carrying the weight of a verdict. "That is their work. Ambushed him. Took his scalp." "It is not a scalp wound," Eliza said, her voice sharp. The men turned to look at her. "The wound is from a blunt object, or a bullet." "What would you know, miss?" the man in the suit snapped. "They killed him for the water. We all knew this was coming. They have been waiting for an excuse." "The rumor took flight, spreading faster than the fire in the barrel. Murdered. By the Dine, by the Red Willow Spring. It was the shock, mister. Davies wanted. It was the lie the town needed." Eliza ignored them. She knelt, her eyes scanning the soft mud at the creek's edge. The body had been found in the water, but the killing had not happened here. The ground was disturbed by the men who had just arrived, but further up, she found what she was looking for. Horseshoe prints, and they were peculiar. Not the smooth curve of a standard shoe. These were marked by 2 deep grooves, cut straight across the iron, forming a shallow X. It was a deliberate mark, made by a smith to identify the horse or improve its grip. She looked up. The tracks led away from the creek, heading northwest, toward the high valley, toward the Dine lands. She returned to her room, her mind racing. She had the photograph of the man with the lightning tattoo. She had the fact of a murdered worker. And she had the tracks. The town had its story, but the tracks told a different one. She saddled the mare she had rented, strapping her camera and notebook securely. She followed the tracks out of town. The trail was easy to follow at first, the grooved X biting deep into the red dust. They led her past the last markers of the railroad survey, into a landscape that grew starker, older. The land rose into broken mesas and deep-cut arroyos. The red dust gave way to sandstone. She felt it before she saw him, a shift in the air, the prickle on her neck that said she was being watched. She rounded a tall spire of rock, and her mare stopped, tossing her head and sidestepping. He was there, blocking the narrow pass. He sat on a spotted stallion that seemed carved from the same sandstone as the cliffs. He was Dine, his face still, his eyes dark and assessing. He held a simple rein of braided horsehair. He carried a rifle in a worn scabbard, but his hands rested on his thighs. He was not threatening. He was simply present, absolute. "You are not welcome here," he said. His voice was low, not loud, but it cut through the silence. His English was clear, cleaner than that of the men in the saloon. "I am following a trail," Eliza said, her hand resting on her saddle horn. "This is not your trail. This land is forbidden." Ashki Nez watched her. He had seen her in town, the woman with the box. He had seen her walk into the saloon. Now she had brought her intrusion here, to the edge of the Red Willow Valley. "A man was murdered," Eliza said, meeting his gaze. "In the town, by the creek. They are blaming your people." "The town always blames my people. It is the only story they know." "These tracks," Eliza pointed. "They lead from the creek. They lead here. They are from a shod horse. A special shoe." Ashki's gaze dropped to the tracks. He dismounted in a single, fluid motion. He knelt. His fingers traced the edge of the grooved print. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "This is not Dine," he said. It was a simple statement of fact. "But you are close to the burial grounds. You will turn back." "I cannot. This is the only lead I have. If I turn back, the town will form a posse. They will ride here, and they will not care about your burial grounds. They will be looking for blood." He studied her. The woman was afraid, but she did not show it in her voice. She was telling the truth. A posse would be a disaster. "I am a reporter," she said, holding up her notebook. "I am here to find the truth, the real truth, not the story they are telling in the saloon." Ashki stood. He looked back the way she had come, then toward the high valley. He knew these tracks. He had seen them before. "If I show you," he said slowly, "you will follow my path. You will not deviate. You will not use your box." He nodded at the camera. "Not here. You will not photograph the valley. You will not photograph my people. And you will not photograph the places of the ancestors. And if I agree, I will take you to where the trail leads. You will see what is there, and then you will write what you have seen. Only that." "I agree," Eliza said without hesitation. He nodded once. "Follow." He led, not on the trail she'd been following, but on a parallel path that seemed invisible. He moved through the brush and rock without a sound. Eliza watched him, fascinated. He was not just riding, he was reading. He would stop, pointing not at the tracks, but at other signs. A single broken twig, snapped high. The rider was in a hurry. He did not duck. He dismounted again, laying his palm flat on a patch of compressed earth. "A wagon. Heavy. It waited here for more than an hour." He sifted the dirt. "And the man on the horse, he was here too." He rose, walking to a low bush. He sniffed the air, then pinched a leaf. "Tar, from the wagon axle. It is fresh. 2 days, maybe 3. Eliza was scribbling in her notebook, her hand flying. He was reading the earth like a page of print. He was not a savage. He was a scholar of the land. Ashki watched her in turn. She did not ask foolish questions. She did not chatter. She watched, she listened, and she wrote. She did not treat him as a curiosity. She treated him as a source. There was a difference. He led her over a rise, and they looked down into a shallow, blackened depression hidden by juniper. "Here," he said. It was a campsite, but not for sleeping. The tracks of the heavy wagon were deep. The grooved horseshoes were everywhere. And in the center, a dark stain. Eliza found it first. A small brass cartridge, glinting in the sun. She picked it up. A Winchester. "Many men have Winchesters," Ashki said. "But not many men have wagons like this," Eliza murmured, looking at the tracks. "Or horses with those shoes." "No," Ashki said. He pointed with his chin toward the distant line of smoke from the town. "Only one, Barlow." The name landed between them. Silas Barlow, the cattle baron, the man who owned the largest ranch, who held the contract for the railroad grading, who had been overheard in the saloon complaining that the Red Willow Valley was wasted on Indians. "He wants the water," Ashki said, his voice flat. And he is willing to kill for it. Eliza finished. They rode back in silence. When they reached the ridge where he had first stopped her, he paused. You have what you see, he said. It is not enough to stop a posse, Eliza replied. But it is a start. Thank you. He simply nodded, then turned his stallion and disappeared into the rocks as silently as he had arrived. When Eliza returned to Dry Cedar, the town was simmering. The blacksmith was talking to the deputy. Men were checking their rifles. The story was set in stone. The Dine had killed the worker. Eliza went straight to the telegraph office. She ignored the stares. She sent her message to Mr. Davies. Worker murdered. Evidence points to local dispute over land and water. Not Dine. Am investigating. She waited the 20 minutes for the reply. It came back clicking, angry. Story is natives. Find the native angle. I want the shock. No angle. No pay. Davies. Eliza crumpled the paper in her fist. She was trapped between her editor's greed and the town's fury. She walked back to her hotel room, the red dust feeling heavier, more suffocating. She unlocked her door, pushed it open, and stopped. A piece of paper, folded neatly, lay on the wooden floor just inside. It had not been there when she left. She picked it up. The handwriting was rough. The pencil pressed hard. It contained only 12 words. Tomorrow night, warehouse shipment. Stay away if you value your life. The note was a threat, but to Eliza Hart, it felt like a map. Stay away if you value your life. It meant the warehouse shipment was the truth, and it was a truth someone would kill to protect. She would not stay away, but she would not go alone. She waited until the town had sunk into the uneasy quiet of midday heat. She walked not to the livery, but out toward the plains, following the path she had taken the day before. She stopped at the high ridge, the one that served as an unspoken border between the town and the Dine Valley. She stood by the tall spire of rock where Ashki Nez had first appeared. She did not know if he would come. She only knew she must ask. She waited for what felt like an hour, the sun pressing down, the silence broken only by the buzz of insects. She was about to turn back when she felt the change in the air, the same prickle of awareness. He was not on his stallion this time. He was on foot, having moved through the juniper and sandstone without making a sound. He stood 20 feet away, his arms crossed. You were told this land is not for you, he said. His voice was not angry, just flat. I know, and I am not here to cross. I am here to ask for help. My help is for my people. This is about your people, Eliza said. She held out the folded note. I received this last night, after I photographed a man burning ledgers at the warehouse, the man with the lightning tattoo. Ashki's expression did not change, but his eyes hardened. He did not take the note. There is a shipment tonight, Eliza continued. They are moving something. The man who was murdered, the man at the creek, he worked for the railroad. I think he knew what they were shipping. I think they killed him to silence him. Ashki was silent for a long moment. He looked past her, toward the Red Willow Valley. The spring is low, he said, his voice quiet, tight with a new tension. The drought, Eliza began. It is not the drought, he cut her off. I was there this morning. The flow is weak. It is choked. Someone has blocked the water upstream, near the railroad cut. Their two fears met in the dry air, the shipment, the blocked water. They are connected, Eliza said. They must be tonight at the warehouse. Ashki looked at her, his gaze intense. He was a man forced to choose between his isolation and his duty. The water was his duty. I will go, he said. Not for your story. For the spring. You will stay here. It is not a place for you. They are arming men. Ashki, the man who burned the books, had a pistol. I need to photograph what they are shipping. If I have proof, I can stop them. I can stop Barlow. Proof is a white man's word. It does not stop bullets. My camera is my proof, she insisted. her hand gripping the strap of the heavy box. "If you are right, and they are stealing the water, I need to see it. I need to document it. I will not be safe alone. And you need a witness who can speak in the town." He considered this. The woman was brave, or perhaps just foolish, but she was right. He could stop one man, but he could not stop the law. She held a power he did not, the power of the printed word. "You will do exactly as I say," he said. "You will make no sound. You will not use the light. The flash, but at night I must—" "You will not," he commanded. "It will bring them down on us." "I will try, but I must get the photograph. I will be ready at dark." "I will find you," he said, and turned, vanishing as silently as he had arrived. That night, the moon was hidden by a high, thin layer of clouds. Ashki led Eliza not to the warehouse yard, but to a high bluff that overlooked the railroad cut. Below them, perhaps 200 yards away, lay the depot, the warehouse, and the dark, winding line of Red Willow Creek as it passed the new construction. "Here," Ashki whispered, his hand gesturing. Eliza saw it instantly. It was new, built of raw, yellow pine. A sluice gate, a heavy wooden valve, had been constructed across the main channel of the creek. "They are diverting it," Eliza whispered, her voice tight with fury. "To the east," Ashki said, his voice cold. "Toward Barlow's land. They are stealing the spring." As they watched, a group of men emerged from the warehouse. Eliza recognized the broad, powerful frame of Silas Barlow. With him was the man with the lightning tattoo, and 4 others. They carried lanterns. They walked to the sluice gate. Barlow barked an order. The men put their shoulders to a large wooden wheel. With a groan of wet wood, the gate began to lower, cutting off the main flow of Red Willow Creek. The water, now blocked, began to swell and push, forcing its way into a freshly dug ditch that led east. At the same time, Ashki whispered, pointing to the warehouse. Another group of men, a heavy wagon. They were loading crates, long, narrow crates. "Winchesters," Eliza breathed. She could see the stenciled name on the side of one box. They were not shipping railroad ties. They were shipping rifles. "For the guards," Ashki said. "Barlow is arming his men." "I have to get this," Eliza said. She planted her tripod. The sound of the legs scraping on the rock seemed impossibly loud. "No," Ashki hissed. "No light." "I have no choice," she said, her hands already moving, sliding the glass plate holder into the back of the camera. "Without the flash, I have nothing but shadows. The world will not believe shadows." She aimed the camera, framing the scene. The men at the sluice gate, Barlow directing them, the men at the warehouse, loading the rifles. It was all there. "Cover your eyes," she said. She pressed the shutter. The magnesium flash was a terrible, brilliant explosion of white light. It bleached the canyon, freezing the men below like statues in a tableau of guilt. For a second, there was absolute silence. Then, a yell. "On the bluff! Get him!" A rifle cracked. The bullet screamed off the rock near Eliza's head. "Go!" Ashki yelled, grabbing her arm. He did not bother with the tripod. He pulled her toward the horses they had hidden in a cleft of rock. "My camera!" she cried, grabbing it. They scrambled onto their mounts. Hoofbeats thundered behind them as Barlow's men spurred their own horses from the depot. "This way, stay with me!" Ashki shouted. He did not ride for the open plain. He spurred his stallion straight into the maze of canyons, a dark, broken landscape that Eliza would have considered impassable by day, let alone at a dead run. Ashki rode not like a man, but like a part of the horse, a part of the night. Eliza pushed her mare, her heart in her throat. Gunshots echoed, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls, making it impossible to tell where they came of. Eliza held the heavy camera in one arm, the reins in the other. She was a good rider, but this was a different world. Ashki led her down a switchback path, A narrow goat trail cut into the cliff. Her mare slipped on the loose gravel. The horse screamed, finding its footing, but the jolt threw Eliza forward. She lost her grip on the camera and lunged to catch it, smashing her right hand against the sandstone wall. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot up her arm. She cried out, but she held on to the camera. "Here!" Ashki's voice cut through her pain. He had veered off the trail, disappearing behind a curtain of rock. It was a fissure, a crack in the canyon wall, barely wide enough for a horse. Eliza plunged her mare into the blackness after him. The passage was tight. They slowed to a walk. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, then disappeared, lost in the maze. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, Ashki leading them on a long, winding path that brought them back to dry cedar from the south. He stopped at the edge of the town, in the shadow of the livery. "You are safe now," he said. "Ashki, He was already gone. He had melted back into the night. Eliza walked her mare to the hotel, her right hand throbbing, wrapped in her handkerchief. She was shaking, exhausted, but triumphant. She had the plate. She had the proof. She reached her room. The door was open. It was splintered, the lock hanging uselessly. She stopped, her blood running cold. She pushed the door open. The room was destroyed. Her clothes were torn from her trunk. The mattress was slashed, feathers dusting the floor. And in the center of the room, her heavy wooden camera lay in pieces. It had been smashed with a boot or a rifle butt. The fine wooden body was splintered. The main lens, her precious, irreplaceable lens, was a starburst of shattered glass. She sank to her knees. They had taken everything. They had destroyed her voice. Then she remembered. The plate, the exposed glass plate, was not in the camera. She had removed it, as was her habit, putting it in its light-proof holder. She scrambled to the corner where she kept her small box of provisions. She plunged her good hand into the large tin of flour. Her fingers brushed against the hard, square edge of the plate holder. It was there. It was safe. She pulled it out, clutching it to her chest, laughing and crying at the same time. A shadow fell across the open doorway. She looked up, startled, her hand flying to her throat. It was Ashki. He stood in the doorway, his face grim. He had seen the broken door. He had followed her. He stepped inside, his gaze taking in the destruction. He looked at the shattered camera, then at her. He saw the flower on her dress, the plate holder clutched in her hand. "You are hurt," he said. He was not asking. He looked at her right hand. The handkerchief was soaked in blood from the gash on her palm. Eliza just shook her head, unable to speak. He walked to her. He knelt. He did not ask permission. He gently, firmly, took her injured hand from her. He unwrapped the sodden cloth. The cut was deep, running from her palm to her wrist, raw and full of grit. He produced a clean strip of cloth from a pouch on his belt. He took her canteen, poured a small amount of water onto the cloth, and began to clean the wound. His touch was methodical, precise. Eliza winced, but she did not pull away. He was kneeling so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him. She could smell the scent of juniper and dust that clung to him. She watched his dark hair, his strong, careful fingers as they worked. He finished cleaning the wound, then wrapped her hand tightly with the clean cloth, tying it off with a practiced knot. His hand stilled. He was still holding her bandaged hand in his. He did not let go. He looked up, his face only inches from hers. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, the destroyed room, the smashed camera, the danger, it all fell away. There was only the intense, quiet scrutiny of his gaze. He saw her, not as a white woman, not as a reporter, but as a person, trembling and fierce. She saw him, not as a warrior, not as an Indian, but as the man who had read the earth, who had led her through the darkness, who was now kneeling in the ruins of her room, holding her hand. He breathed in, She saw his chest rise. He looked at her mouth, then back at her eyes. The air between them was so thick it was hard to breathe. Then he broke the look. He gently placed her bandaged hand in her lap. He stood up, breaking the spell. "You have your proof," he said, his voice low. "Guard it. They will come for it." He turned and slipped out the door, as silent as a shadow. Eliza sat there for a long time. The next morning, she awoke stiff and sore on the floor. The reality of her situation returned. She had the plate, but her camera was destroyed. She could not take more pictures, and she had no way to develop this one. She went downstairs. The hotel proprietor avoided her gaze. The entire town seemed to know what had happened. And there, nailed to the town's central message board, was a new notice. Silas Barlow, it declared, was formally petitioning the Territorial Commission for Water Rights. He was bidding to take legal control of the Red Willow Spring, citing the recent murder and the general unrest as proof that the Dine community could not be trusted to manage the resource. A hearing was set. If he won, the Dine would lose their water. Legally. Eliza felt sick. Barlow was not just stealing the water. He was using the murder he had engineered as the reason to do it. She walked to the telegraph office, a cold resolve settling in her. She had to get her story out. She had to find a way to develop that plate. A package was waiting for her. It was a thick roll of paper from the Frontier Ledger. She unrolled it. Her stomach dropped. It was a stack of pre-printed flyers, a mock-up of a front page. At the top, in giant, lurid letters, was a headline. "Bury me deeper," she gasped. Navajo warrior Grinned, fingers tracing. "Careful, I might never stop." Below it was a crude, sensational drawing of a dark-skinned man pulling a white woman onto his horse. A note was attached, scrawled in Mr. Davies' impatient hand. "Miss Hart, stop wasting my time with water politics. This is your story, the savage and the lady. This is the heat. I am sending these posters to other territories to build interest. Send me the article to match this headline, or you are fired." Eliza crumpled the note. This was not journalism. This was filth. It was a grotesque lie, a violation of the quiet, respectful moment in her room. And then, a more terrible realization hit her. Davies had sent these to other territories. It would not be long before one of these posters found its way back to Dry Cedar, back to Silas Barlow. She now understood. This poster was not just a betrayal. It was a weapon. Barlow would use it to paint her as a degenerate, a woman sleeping with the enemy. He would use it to destroy her credibility, and to dismiss her single, precious glass plate as nothing more than a woman's scorned fantasy. Eliza stared at the obscene poster, her stomach turning. This was not journalism. It was a brand. Mr. Davies had branded her, and in doing so, had handed Silas Barlow the very tool he needed to destroy her. She looked at the crude drawing, the lie of her words, the violation of her privacy. She felt a cold fury, purer than any emotion she had ever known. She had one ally, and she had one weapon. She tore the poster from the telegraph office wall, ripped it into quarters, and let the pieces fall into the red dust. She went back to her ruined room. She barricaded the door with the broken chair and the remains of the bed frame. She needed to develop the plate. She had the light-proof holder. She had the tin of flour, but she had no chemicals. Her bottles had been smashed along with her lens. She thought for a long, hard minute. Chemicals. Who in a town like this kept chemicals? The doctor. She cleaned herself as best she could, put on her last clean blouse, and walked to the small office of Dr. Miller. He was a thin man with glasses, overwhelmed by the dust and the ailments of the frontier. "Miss Hart," he said, surprised. "I heard what happened at the hotel. A terrible thing." "It was, Doctor, I am here on business. I am testing the water quality in the territory. For my paper." It was a thin lie, but it was plausible. "I need supplies. Gallic acid, silver nitrate, and sodium thiosulfate. He raised an eyebrow. That is an unusual combination for water testing. Miss, it sounds a great deal like photography. Eliza met his gaze. It is, doctor, but I cannot speak of what I'm photographing. Only that it concerns the health and safety of this town and the life of the man pulled from the creek. My equipment was destroyed. I have one plate. I must develop it. Dr. Miller looked at her. He saw the desperation, but also the resolve. He was a man of science. He hated lies. I will not ask what it is, he said quietly. But the nitrate is expensive. It will be $2. Thank you, Eliza said, placing the coins on his desk. He wrapped the small bottles and powders in brown paper. Be careful, Miss Hart, the fixer. It smells, and be careful of Barlow. He is not a man who values curiosity. She returned to her room and locked herself in. She worked by the light of a single candle, her back to the flame. She mixed the developer in her wash basin. Her hands, one bandaged, one steady, were gentle. She slipped the glass plate from its holder and slid it into the bath. She waited, rocking the basin, her heart counting the seconds. Slowly, like a ghost emerging from fog, the image appeared. It was perfect. The magnesium flash had frozen everything. She saw the raw wood of the sluice gate. She saw the men at the wheel. She saw Silas Barlow, his arm outstretched, pointing, and she saw the man with the lightning tattoo, clear as day, his hand resting on a crate stenciled Winchester. She pulled the plate, rinsed it, and slid it into the fixer. The smell was sharp, stinging her eyes. But as the image became permanent, she felt a surge of triumph. This was the truth. This was her voice. Now, she needed a name. She left the plate drying in the dark and went to find the blacksmith. Tom, the smith, was hammering a glowing piece of iron, the blows ringing with a frustration that went beyond the metal. He saw her and nodded, his face grim. Miss Hart, the town is not safe for you. I know, she said, staying clear of the flying sparks. Tom, you were there when they pulled the worker from the creek. I was a bad business. I found tracks, she said, keeping her voice low. Horseshoe tracks. They had a mark, 2 grooves cut across, like a letter X. Tom stopped hammering. The forge roared in the sudden silence. He placed the iron back into the coals. You have a good eye, he said, his voice flat. Who do they belong to? He wiped his face with a greasy cloth. They belong to a man I wish I had never shod for. He paid in gold, and I did not ask questions. I should have. What is his name? Tom Cutter Hale, the blacksmith said. He rides for Barlow. Came in with the grading crew, but he is no railroad man. He is a gun, a bad one. Has a tattoo on his hand, a lightning bolt. Eliza's heart hammered. Cutter Hale. She had the name. Thank you. Tom, you have done a good thing. I have done nothing yet, he said, turning back to the fire. But I am tired of mending things that bad men break. She needed the motive. The water was part of it. But the burned books, the railroad worker, that was about money. She found the widow's shack at the edge of town, in the scrubland known as Canvas Town. Mrs. Tobin was a small woman, her eyes red from a week of crying and a lifetime of hard work. She was packing a small, battered trunk. Ma'am, please, Eliza said, her hand on the woman's arm. I am Eliza Hart. I am trying to find out who did this to your husband. You cannot. The woman wept, pulling away. They will kill me too. They already warned me. Take the pay and go, they said. Who warned you? Was it a man named Cutter Hale? Mrs. Tobin's head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror. You know his name. What did your husband know? Mrs. Tobin. Why was he killed? The widow sank onto a stool. The books, she whispered. My Liam. He was a timekeeper. He was honest, too honest for this place. He found the ghost payroll. Ghost payroll. Barlow. He has the contract. He was billing the railroad for 50 men on the grading crew. He was only paying 30. The other 20. They were ghosts. Barlow and that devil Hale. They were pocketing the money. Thousands of dollars. My Liam found the real ledgers. He was going to show the federal inspector when he came, and they killed him for it. Eliza wrote it all down, her bandaged hand aching. Embezzlement, a motive colder and harder than a dispute over water. "Thank you," Eliza said. "You must go. You must be safe." "You," the widow said, grabbing Eliza's arm. "You are the one who is not safe. They know you have been asking. They will not let you leave this town alive." As Eliza left the shack, the sky, which had been a metallic gray all day, finally broke. The rain did not start. It began. A sudden violent downpour that turned the red dust to thick, running mud in seconds. The wind howled, tearing at her clothes. She ran to her mare, struggling to mount. The world had dissolved into a roar of water and noise. She was half blind, the rain stinging her face. A low rumble started, deeper than the thunder. It came from the earth itself. The ground beneath the horse's hooves shuddered. A small quake, a tremor. "Eliza?" The voice was a shout, almost lost in the storm. Ashki was there, on his stallion, his face a mask of fierce urgency. He rode straight to her, grabbing her mare's bridle. "The creek!" he yelled. "The water is rising, the earth shook." He spurred his horse, pulling her along. They rode hard, not toward the town, but toward the railroad cut. They reached the bluff where they had hidden before. The sight below was terrifying. The rain and the tremor had been too much for Barlow's new, raw earthwork. The illegal sluice gate was holding, but the dam of fresh dirt around it was collapsing. A wall of brown, churning mud was sliding down into the canyon. "The burial grounds," Ashki said, his voice raw. The mudslide was moving directly toward the quiet, sacred grove in the Red Willow Valley. "We have to stop it," Eliza cried. "We cannot stop the mountain," he yelled back. "We have to wait. The storm is too strong." He pulled her from her horse and dragged her toward a shallow cave, an overhang in the rock face. Just as a fresh sheet of rain hit, they huddled inside, soaked and breathing hard, as the storm raged around them. The sound of the sliding mud was a sickening, grinding roar. They were trapped, pressed close in the small space. "I have it," Eliza said, shouting over the wind. "What?" "The proof. The photograph." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the hard, glass plate, wrapped in her last dry cloth. "I developed it. It shows Barlow. It shows the rifles. It shows the man with the tattoo." "Cutter Hale," Ashki said, his voice cold. "You know him." "My cousin, Night Horse. He went to the sluice gate 2 days ago, to protest. He went alone. I found him this morning. His ribs are broken. His face, they left him for dead." They stared at each other, the weight of their separate knowledge meeting in the dim light of the cave. "I have his name," Eliza said, her voice shaking. "And I have the motive. He and Barlow are stealing payroll money. They killed the worker to hide it." "They kill for money," Ashki said. "And they kill for water. And now they try to bury our ancestors." The fury in his voice was a tangible thing. He turned and struck the stone wall of the cave with his fist. "I cannot stop the rain," he said, his voice tight. "No?" Eliza said. She reached out, placing her good hand on his arm. "But we can stop him." He turned to her. The rain was easing, the roar diminishing to a steady drumming. He looked at her hand on his arm. He touched the stone wall. "The land speaks. It is angry. You must learn to listen." He took her bandaged hand, the one he had wrapped, and placed it flat against the sandstone. "Close your eyes," he commanded. She did. "Feel it, not just the cold. Feel the vibration, The water running deep inside the rock. The tremor. It is alive. She focused, pushing past the storm, past her fear. She felt it, a low, steady thrum, the heartbeat of the earth. It was solid. It was real. "I feel it," she whispered. "It does not lie," he said. "Ashki," she said, opening her eyes. "I need you to know. That poster, the one my editor sent, it is a lie. I will never write that story. I will not betray you. I will not sell you for my career." He studied her face, his gaze intense. "And I will not betray you," he replied, his voice low. "I will not trade your safety for the water. This is our promise." The space between them was small, filled with the sound of dripping water and the shared understanding of their peril. He was not just a warrior. She was not just a reporter. They were two people bound by the same truth. He leaned forward, slowly. He was watching her eyes, giving her every chance to turn away. She did not. His lips met hers. It was not a kiss of passion, but of pact. It was short, firm, and respectful. It tasted of rain and stone, and a profound, compressed honesty. It was a promise sealed in the heart of the storm. He pulled back, his hand still covering hers on the rock wall. "The rain is stopping," he said, his voice thicker than before. "We must go." They emerged from the cave into a world washed clean, but visibly wounded. The mudslide had slowed, stopping just short of the first burial markers. But the illegal sluice gate was shattered, the creek now flowing wild and brown, carving a new angry path. They rode back to Dry Cedar in silence. The town was emerging, people checking the damage from the storm. As they reached the main street, Eliza saw it. It was not one poster, it was 20. Barlow had received his own copies. One was nailed to the door of the Last Chance Saloon. Another was nailed to the door of the church. Silas Barlow himself was standing on the boardwalk of the general store. With him were the saloon owner and the town's preacher, Reverend Gideon, his face a mask of pious fury. A crowd of townsfolk had gathered. "And this is the woman," Barlow was shouting, his voice ringing across the damp street. He pointed, not at a poster, but at Eliza. She sat on her mare, muddy from the storm, her hair loose. Beside her, tall and imposing, was Ashki on his stallion. They had ridden in together, allies returning from the storm. To the town, it was a confirmation of the lie. "This is the harlot who comes to our town," Reverend Gideon cried, his voice shaking with false righteousness. "Consorting with the savage sharing his blanket, and she dares to accuse Mr. Barlow, the man building our future, of wrongdoing." The crowd turned. The faces were not curious. They were hostile. They were faces of judgment. "She lies," Barlow roared. "She is a woman of no morals. Her proof is nothing but the invention of a jilted lover." Eliza looked at the faces, at the preacher, at Barlow. She looked at Ashki, his face impassive, his hand resting near his rifle. She had the name, she had the motive, she had the photograph, and she had just lost the one thing she needed to use them her credibility. The crowd parted, the faces of the women, who had perhaps seen a fellow woman of courage, now hardened with contempt. The men, who had seen an intruder, now saw a degenerate. Reverend Gideon's words had turned her from a curiosity into a contagion. "Shame!" a woman cried out, pulling her child close, as if Eliza's presence alone could infect him. Silas Barlow smiled, a thin, satisfied pull of his lips. He had not needed to deny the murder or the water. He had simply needed to destroy the messenger. Ashki's hand moved, not toward his rifle, but to the reins of Eliza's mare. He tugged them gently, turning her horse away from the crowd. "We go," he said, his voice low and calm, yet it cut through the murmurs. They rode out of Dry Cedar. No one tried to stop them. They were an island of silence in the street filled with whispers. Eliza kept her back straight, her gaze fixed between her horse's ears. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. The boycott was immediate and absolute. When Eliza returned to the hotel later, hoping to gather her few remaining possessions, the proprietor blocked the door. "We do not house your kind. Miss Hart, your things are in the alley." He had thrown her trunk and the ruined pieces of her camera into the mud. At the general store, the clerk turned his back when she entered. "We are out of everything you need," he said to a shelf of canned beans. The town had shut its doors. She was an outcast. Worse, the official mechanism had begun to turn. A new notice was posted, signed by the county commissioner, a man Eliza had never seen. In light of the recent violence at Red Willow Creek, it read, and the clear potential for further unrest. A formal review of the water rights agreement with the Dine community is hereby scheduled. All water access will be reconsidered to ensure the safety and security of the citizens of Dry Cedar. Barlow's lie, bolstered by the preacher's manufactured outrage, was becoming law. Ashki faced his own crisis. He met with his uncle, a quiet, white-haired elder, near the spring. The water was still low, muddy from the storm. The damage to the sluice gate had been a temporary reprieve, not a solution. "She brings this trouble," his uncle said, his gaze on the sacred burial markers, still rimmed with drying mud. "The town looks for an excuse to take this valley. You have given them one." "She speaks the truth," Ashki replied, his voice tight. "Barlow murdered that man. Barlow is stealing the water and the railroad's money. He beat Nighthorse." "Her truth is not our truth," the elder said. "Our truth is the water. It is the land. It is the people. Your path with this woman. It puts the people in danger. Nighthorse heals, but the valley may not. Let the white men fight their own battles." "And if I do?" Ashki asked. "Barlow wins. He takes the water. We lose the valley anyway. The only difference is that he wins without a fight." "There is always a fight," his uncle said sadly. "You must choose which one." Ashki knew his choice was made. To abandon Eliza now would be to abandon the truth. It would be a betrayal of the promise they made in the cave. It would be a betrayal of himself. The two paths had merged. They met that night in the one place that would not turn them away, the smithy. Tom, the blacksmith, banked his forge, casting the room in deep shadows. "They have named me an outlaw," Eliza said, her voice weary. She held the glass plate, wrapped in cloth. "This photo is useless if no one will look at it. They have blinded the town." "They are blinded by fear," Tom said, wiping his hands. "And by hate." "We need more," Eliza said, looking at Ashki. "We have the photo. We have the motive from the widow. But we need the proof of the money. The ghost payroll." "Cutter Hale," Ashki said. "He will not talk," Tom scoffed. "He is Barlow's dog." "Every dog has a leash," Eliza said, a new hardness in her voice. "And Barlow holds this one with money. Mrs. Tobin said her husband found the real ledgers. We need those ledgers." "Cutter will not know where they are," Ashki said. "No," Eliza agreed. "But he knows who does." They formed the plan. It was desperate. Cutter Hale was a killer, but he was also greedy. And he was arrogant. The lure was not money. It was a threat. Tom, the smith, went to the saloon. He drank a beer and spoke, just loud enough to be overheard by one of Barlow's men. He complained about the rain, about the mud. "And worse," he grumbled. "That newspaper woman, she was in my smithy, asking about those X-horseshoes, the ones I made for Cutter Hale." The message was sent. They gave it a day to simmer. Then they sent the second message. A boy, paid a nickel, delivered a note to the saloon, to be given to Hale. The note was simple. "The ruined bridge, midnight. Come alone. We have the plate. You will want to buy it." It was a lie, but it was a believable one. Hale would think she was a cornered rat, trying to sell her only weapon before fleeing. The ruined bridge was a skeleton of timbers over a dry arroyo. 5 miles from town, it was a place of no jurisdiction. Eliza waited, hidden in the rocks below the bridge, her heart pounding a rhythm against her ribs. The glass plate was in her satchel. Ashki was not visible. He was simply there, part of the shadows. Cutter Hale arrived on time. He rode his horse with the distinct X-shod hooves. He was whistling, confident. He dismounted, walking onto the bridge, his pistol drawn and held casually at his side. "All right, girlie," he called into the darkness. "You wanted a meeting. I am here. You got something to sell." Eliza stepped out from the rocks. She stood 30 feet from him, the moonlight catching her face. "Cutter Hale," she said, her voice steady. He laughed. "So it is you. Barlow was right. You got sand. Stupid. But sand. Where is the engine? I figured he was your shadow." "He is not here," Eliza lied. "This is between you and me." "Is it now?" He took a step toward her. "And what are you selling that little picture?" "I am not selling it," Eliza said. "I am trading it for the Black Ledger." Hale stopped. His amusement vanished. "I do not know what you are talking about." "The ghost payroll. The money you and Barlow stole. The reason you killed Liam Tobin." Hale raised his pistol. "You talk too much." "If you shoot me," Eliza said, her voice dropping, "this plate goes to the federal marshal in the morning. It shows you. It shows Barlow. It shows the rifles. It is enough to hang you both." "You are bluffing. You would have sent it already." "I was waiting for a name, the name of the accountant who keeps the real books." Hale's eyes darted left and right. He was trapped. He could not shoot her, not without risking the photo. He could not let her go. "Finch," he spat. "Jeremiah Finch, the little man at the railroad office. He keeps the books. Now give me the plate." "First, you will come with me." Eliza said, "You will tell the county commissioner what you just told me." Hale laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I will not." He lunged, moving with surprising speed, to grab her. He never reached her. A shadow detached itself from the support timbers of the bridge. Ashki moved with a silence that was terrifying. He was not on Hale. He was behind him. Haley sensed him, turning, firing his pistol. The shot went wide, echoing in the arroyo. The fight was not a brawl. It was a dismantling. Hale was a brute, all fists and power. Ashki was a student of leverage and momentum. He met Hale's lunging punch, deflecting the arm, and drove his elbow into Hale's ribs. Hale grunted, swinging his empty pistol like a club. Ashki ducked under the blow, sweeping Hale's legs from under him. Haley crashed to the ground. Ashki was on him, a knee on his chest, a knife at his throat. It was over in 5 seconds. "Finch," Ashki said, his voice a cold whisper. "Where does he keep the ledger?" Hale, his arrogance shattered, was just a terrified man. "In the office, in a floor safe under the desk. Now let me go, I told you." "You will tell the deputy," Eliza said, stepping forward. Ashki hauled him to his feet, binding his hands with a leather thong. "We will take him to town." They started the long walk back, Ashki leading his horse, Eliza leading hers, with Hale stumbling between them. They had won. They had the name. They had the witness. And then the world changed. The wind had been rising, but they had ignored it, focused on the confrontation. Now, it hit them. A low, growing moan that turned into a shriek. The air grew thick, the moon disappearing behind a wall of yellow dust. "Sandstorm," Ashki yelled, pulling his neckerchief over his face. It hit them like a solid thing, a blast of stinging, suffocating grit that reduced visibility to zero. The horses screamed. Eliza was blinded, her eyes forced shut. She clung to her mare's reins. "Hold him!" Ashki shouted. But it was too late. In the howling chaos, Cutter Hale lowered his head like a bull and slammed his shoulder into Ashki. The blow, unexpected, sent Ashki stumbling. Hale, his hands still bound, sprinted into the wall of dust. "No!" Eliza cried. Ashki ran after him, disappearing instantly. Eliza was alone. The wind tore at her, the sand cutting her exposed skin. She could not see, she could not hear anything but the roar. "Ashki!" she screamed. Her voice was stolen by the gale. She stumbled, falling to her knees. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She was lost. She would die here, buried in the dust. A hand closed on her arm. She cried out, lashing out. "It is me," Ashki's voice said, right in her ear. He had to shout to be heard. "He is gone. We must find shelter." He pulled her to her feet. The horses were gone, panicked by the storm. "I cannot see," she cried. "Hold to me." He put her hand on his belt, and he began to walk, leaning into the wind. It was impossible. Every step was a battle. The sand was piling, forming drifts. Eliza fell. Her legs were too weak. The air was too thick to breathe. Ashki stopped. He turned, and without a word, he lifted her. He was not a large man, but his strength was like the roots of a tree. He carried her, his head bent, his body shielding hers from the worst of the stinging sand. He walked. Eliza did not know for how long. She buried her face in his shoulder, her world reduced to the scratch of his shirt, the solid muscle beneath, and the scream of the wind. He stumbled, almost falling, and then he pushed through something. The sound of the storm diminished, muffled. They were inside. He set her down gently. She collapsed onto a dirt floor. He found the door, a flimsy plank of wood, and forced it shut, bracing it with a piece of rotted timber. They were in a sod hut, one of the small, failed homesteads that dotted the prairie. It was tiny, barely 6 feet square, and smelled of dry earth and old rain. But it was shelter. For a long time, they just sat, gasping for air, spitting out the grit. Ashki shared the last of the water from his canteen. They drank, the warm, tin-tasting water, the most precious thing in the world. "He is gone," Eliza said, her voice hoarse. "We lost him." "We did not lose the name." Ashki said, "Finch." They sat in the darkness, the storm a muffled roar outside. The hut was an intimate, enforced prison. "My family, they live in Boston," Eliza said, her voice quiet. "My father owns a bank. He wanted me to marry, to be a hostess. He said this camera, this work, it was unladylike. He said I was running from my duty." Ashki was silent, listening. "Maybe I was," she whispered. "But it felt like I was running to something real." He shifted, his shoulder brushing hers in the dark. "My cousin, Night Horse," he said, his voice low. "When I found him, he did not make a sound. He was trying to be strong, but he was afraid. Not of the pain. He was afraid that I had been wrong, that my way, trying to talk, to find proof, was weak, that I should have met them with a rifle." "Are you weak, Ashki?" she asked. "I am here," he said, as if that answered it. "In this dirt house, with you. The man who hurt him is free." "But we know the truth," she said. "We know about Finch." He touched her face, his fingers rough, gently wiping the grit from her cheek. "Your truth is a dangerous thing, Eliza Hart." The touch lingered. It was not the brief, desperate pact in the cave. This was different. It was the comfort of 2 people who had survived, who had seen the worst in each other's worlds and had not flinched. "After this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "After we find Finch, after the truth is out, I do not want to run anymore." He leaned closer. She could feel his breath. "When justice is done," he said, his own voice thick, "we will not run from this feeling." He did not kiss her. He rested his forehead against hers for a long, quiet moment. It was a promise, a shared breath in the heart of the storm. When the wind finally died at dawn, they emerged into a world remade. The landscape was scoured, the dunes shifted. They walked back to Dry Cedar, a long, exhausting trek. Cutter Hale was gone, but they had his secret. Eliza went straight to the telegraph office. The operator, seeing her beaten and covered in dust, tried to stop her. "Miss Hart, I cannot—" "Barlow." "You will," Eliza said, placing a $5 gold piece on the counter. It was almost all the money she had left. "And you will send it to the Frontier Ledger. And you will send it to the Arizona Territorial in Prescott." She wrote the dispatch. It was not a plea. It was a statement. Silas Barlow, contractor for the Dry Cedar Railroad, implicated in murder of worker Liam Tobin. Ghost payroll fraud suspected. Barlow has illegally diverted water from Red Willow Spring, threatening Dine community. Witness Cutter Hale. Barlow employee has fled. Barlow using local preacher to incite unrest and discredit investigation. Formal hearing demanded. She pushed the paper to the operator. "Send it, now." She had fired her last shot. The reply from Barlow was swift. He did not bother with the telegraph. He went to the deputy. By noon, a new poster was nailed to every post in town. It was not a lurid mock-up. It was an official warrant. Wanted for trespassing and conspiracy to incite unrest. $10 gold, Eliza Hart. The Sabbath arrived not with peace, but with poison. The church bell rang, its clean metallic sound cutting through the morning air, but it was drowned by the shouts of a boy selling the Cedar Gazette. It was a new paper, a flimsy sheet printed with Barlow's money, and it had one purpose. Eliza saw it from the window of the smithy, where she had spent a restless night dozing on a pile of burlap sacks. The headline was the one from Mr. Davies's nightmare poster. "Bury me deeper," she gasped. Navajo warrior grinned, fingers tracing. "Careful, I might never stop." It was not just the words. Below it was a drawing, a grotesque caricature. It depicted a dark, feral-looking man with exaggerated features, meant to be Ashki, pulling a disheveled, wild-eyed woman, meant to be her, into a dark canyon. It was an image of pure racial hatred and sexual fear, designed to ignite the town's darkest impulses. The bell continued to ring, calling the faithful to worship. From the pulpit, Reverend Gideon did not speak of forgiveness. He held the Gazette aloft, his face purpled with righteous rage. "This is the sickness that has come to our town," he thundered, his voice echoing in the small church. "This is the moral rot brought by an ungodly woman and the savage who bewitches her. They seek to tear down the man who builds our town. Mr. Barlow, with their lies and their sin, we must cut this infection out." The sermon was a call to arms. When the service ended, the congregation did not disperse. They merged with the men spilling out of the Last Chance saloon, who had been drinking to the crude drawing all morning. A crowd formed, united by fear and self-righteousness. Men began grabbing torches. They were unlit, it was still bright daylight, but their purpose was clear. They were a mob. "Where is she?" a man yelled. "She is wanted $10. "She is at the smithy," another voice cried. "Saw her go in." Eliza watched them come, a river of angry faces flooding the main street. Ashki stepped out of the shadows of the stable. He had not been far. He had known this was coming. He walked to the smithy door. "They are here," he said, his voice calm. "We cannot stay," Eliza said, her hand gripping the glass plate in her satchel. "They will tear this place apart to find us." "We will not hide," Ashki said. "You cannot show them your back, not now." He looked at her, his gaze steady, cutting through her fear. "We face them." He slid the heavy bar from the smithy door and pushed it open. He walked out into the sunlight. Eliza, her heart hammering, walked out beside him. They did not run. They walked deliberately to the center of the town. Stopping on the raised wooden steps of the general store, they stood above the crowd. waiting. The mob surged toward them, a wave of shouts and accusations. Reverend Gideon was at the front, his face slick with sweat.
"There she is, the harlot, the fugitive!"
he screamed, pointing a trembling finger.
"And the savage defiling our town square!"
"Shame!" the woman who had shooed her from the store yelled.
"Witch!"
Eliza's first instinct was to defend herself, to scream that they were wrong, that the poster was a lie. But she looked at their faces. They were not listening. They did not want the truth. They wanted a sacrifice. She let the wave of hatred wash over her, and she stood still. When the shouting died for a moment, she did not look at the preacher. She looked at the faces in the crowd, the women, the men who worked for a living. She pulled out her notebook, the one from Boston, the one filled with her meticulous notes. "I am a reporter," she said, her voice clear and strong, louder than she expected. It cut through the murmurs. "I came here to find a missing man. I found him murdered."
"By him!"
a man shouted, pointing at Ashki. "No," Eliza said. "He was murdered by Cutter Hale, a man who works for Silas Barlow. He was murdered to cover up the theft of your money. The railroad's money."
"Lies!"
the deputy yelled, pushing his way forward. "I am not here to speak of sin," Eliza said, her gaze finding the Reverend. "I am here to speak of water." She flipped a page in her notebook. "I spoke to an elder, a dying man. He asked me, 'What is the worth of water?' He said, 'The white man thinks he can own it. He thinks he can put a price on it. But water is not a coin. Water is life. It does not belong to one man. It belongs to the earth. When you steal the water, you steal the life from all of us. From the dine, from the rancher, from the town. You steal the future from our children." A silence fell. This was not the argument they had expected. She was not talking about herself. She was talking about them. Ashki stood beside her, his arms crossed. He had not moved. He had not spoken. His stillness was a counterpoint to their rage, a solid, unmovable presence. He was not threatening. He was simply there. He would not be moved. Into the silence, a new voice rang out. "She is telling the truth." The crowd turned. Tom, the blacksmith, pushed his way to the front. He was in his church clothes, but he held something in his hand. "I have been silent," Tom said, his voice booming. "I have been afraid of Barlow, afraid of losing my shop. But I listened to the Reverend this morning, and he spoke of sin, and the sin is mine, for being silent." He held up a twisted, grooved piece of iron. It was a horseshoe spike. "I made this," he said. "I made a set of shoes with this mark, a grooved X. I made them for Cutter Hale. I shot his horse myself 2 months ago, and I saw those same tracks by the creek. The morning we found Liam Tobin's body. The tracks came from Barlow's land, and they went back. He is right." He nodded at Ashki. "It was not the Dine. It was one of us." The crowd was stunned. This was not the outcast reporter. This was Tom, their smith, a man they trusted. The foundation of their certainty began to crack. Silas Barlow saw his advantage vanishing. He strode through the crowd, his face dark with fury. Beside him was the deputy, his hand on his pistol. "This is a circus," Barlow roared. "This woman is a fugitive. This man is a trespasser, and you," he sneered at Tom, "are a liar deputy. Do your job. Arrest them. Arrest them all for inciting a riot." The deputy drew his pistol. He pointed it at Eliza. "You are under arrest. Hart, you and him, for the warrant, for disturbing the peace." He reached for Eliza's arm. Ashki moved. He did not touch the deputy. He simply stepped between him and Eliza. "No," Ashki said. The word was quiet, yet it seemed to shake the boardwalk. "Get out of my way, Injun!" the deputy snarled, shoving Ashki's chest. "That is resisting arrest." "We will not be taken by a man on Barlow's payroll," Ashki said. His eyes locked on the deputy. "This is not the law. This is a private army."
"It is the law,"
the deputy yelled, his hands shaking, the gun still pointed. "And you will obey it. Then we will use the law," Ashki said. He did not look at Barlow. He looked past him, at the crowd, and at Reverend Gideon, who was watching, his certainty now visibly shaken. "This town has a charter," Ashki said, his voice resonating. "I have read it, nailed to the wall of the courthouse. It says any citizen can call for a public hearing if they believe the law is being used unjustly, if they believe the town is in danger."
"He is not a citizen,"
Barlow shouted. "She is," Tom the blacksmith said, stepping up onto the boardwalk with them. "And so am I, and I am calling for it. A community hearing." The crowd murmured. This was their law. Barlow looked at Reverend Gideon.
"Reverend, tell them this is madness. This is a mockery."
The Reverend was trapped. He was a man of the cloth, but he was also the town's moral guardian. He could not, in front of his entire congregation, deny the town's own charter. "The charter, it does allow for a hearing," Gideon stammered, his eyes on the ground. "It is the rule." The crowd erupted. "A hearing!" "I demand a hearing," Eliza cried out, seizing the moment. "To present my evidence, the photograph, the ledger, the testimony of the widow, the testimony of your blacksmith." Barlow was trapped. He was shaking with rage. To deny the hearing now would be to admit his guilt. "Fine," he spat. "Have your hearing tomorrow, at noon right here. The whole town will see what a fool you are. And when you are done, I will personally see you hanged." He turned and stormed away, the deputy and his men following like dogs at his heel. The crowd began to break apart, no longer a mob, but an audience, buzzing with anticipation. They had a spectacle. They would wait. Eliza, Ashki, and Tom were left standing on the steps. Eliza was shaking, the adrenaline leaving her weak. "You bought us time," Tom said, his face grim. "Until noon tomorrow. He will not make it easy." "Thank you, Tom," Eliza said, her voice trembling. "You risked everything." "I am just tired of being a coward," the smith said. He looked at Ashki and nodded, a look of profound, new respect. "I will stand with you tomorrow." He turned and walked back to his smithy. Eliza and Ashki stood alone in the quiet square. "We did it," Eliza whispered, looking at Ashki. "We won the next day," he corrected her, his gaze sweeping the rooftops, the alleys. He was still watching. "The night is not over," as if his words had summoned it. The young telegraph operator, Sam, came sprinting from his office, his face pale. "Miss Hart Ashki," he panted, looking around nervously. "I have to tell you, I heard one of Barlow's men. He was drunk, bragging." "Bragging about what?" Eliza asked, her blood running cold. "Barlow is not waiting for the hearing. He knows he will lose. He knows about your photo, about the ledger. He is going to end it tonight." "How?" Ashki demanded. "The storm," Sam whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "It damaged the sluice gate, but it did not damage the dynamite they stored at the railroad cut. They are going to blow the cut tonight. Under cover of dark, they are going to flood the entire Red Willow Valley," he said. He said Barlow wants to wash the evidence and the ancestors away at the same time. The moon was gone, hidden by a heavy bank of clouds that promised more rain. The air was thick and cold. Midnight. They rode out of Dry Cedar, not as a posse, but as a small, desperate band of witnesses. Eliza Hart, her courage a cold, hard knot in her stomach. Ashki Nez, his face a mask of stone, riding for the graves of his ancestors. Tom, the blacksmith, his heavy work hands gripping the reins, his silence a promise. With them were two others, Mrs. Tobin, the widow, her small face set with a terrible resolve. She had lost her husband to Barlow's greed. She would not let him take the town, too, and a new, unexpected ally, the young pastor, Reverend Cole. He was a quiet man who had assisted Reverend Gideon, but who had watched the events in the square with a look of growing horror. "I cannot let the house of God be used to justify a lie," he had said to them at the smithy, his voice shaking. "I will stand with you." 5 riders against Barlow's guns. They did not follow the main road. Ashki led them through the same broken maze of arroyos he had used to escape. His knowledge of the land their only shield. The air smelled of ozone and wet rock. A storm was building. They dismounted a quarter-mile from the railroad cut. Hiding the horses in a deep ravine, they moved the rest of the way on foot. As they crested the last ridge, they saw it. The scene was lit by 3 lanterns. The damaged sluice gate, a jagged skeleton of wet pine, was visible in the gloom. Near it, at the narrowest part of the canyon, was a deep-set bank of fresh earth. Cutter Hale was there. With him were 4 other men, all carrying rifles. They were working quickly, tamping something into a hole drilled in the rock wall. "The dynamite," Tom whispered, his hand tightening on the heavy hammer he now carried. "They are planting it in the canyon wall." Ashki breathed, his voice raw. "Not just the sluice. They mean to bring the whole cliff down. It will create a dam of rock. The valley will be underwater by morning." Barlow was not just washing away evidence. He was enacting a final, brutal sentence of erasure. "We have to stop them," Eliza said. "Tom, you and the Reverend," Ashki commanded, his voice a low, sharp whisper. "Take Mrs. Tobin. Move down to the east flank. Make noise. Draw 2 of them. I will take the 2 on the left. Eliza, you stay here. You are the witness." "No," Eliza said. She was fumbling in her satchel, the one that held the precious glass plate. She pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped packet. "I am the distraction." Ashki looked at the packet. "What is it?" "Magnesium powder," she said, her voice tight. "For my flash, if I can get close to a lantern." He understood, a blinding light, confusion. "It is too dangerous," he said. "So is this," she countered, gesturing to the dynamite. "Go! I will follow!" He looked at her for one long second, seeing not the woman from Boston, but a warrior as fierce as any he knew. He nodded. "Now." Tom and the others slipped away into the darkness. Ashki melted into the rocks to the left, his braided reins in one hand, his knife in the other. Eliza moved down the center, her heart a drum. She kept her eyes on Cutter Hale. He was holding a lantern, arguing with one of the men. A shout. From the east. Tom had slammed his hammer against a loose boulder, the metallic ring echoing like a gunshot. "What was that?" one of the guards yelled. "It is nothing," Cutter snarled. "Just a rock slide." "Go check it," another man said, nervous. "You and Jake, go." 2 of the gunmen peeled off, heading toward the sound. Cutter turned back to the dynamite, raising his lantern. "Almost done. Get the fuse." At that moment, 2 things happened. Ashki struck. He moved from the shadows like a panther. He used the braided reins not as a weapon, but as a tool. He looped them around the neck of the man with the fuse, pulling him backward, choking him silently. The man dropped. The last guard spun, raising his rifle, but Ashki was already on him. A brutal, silent takedown that ended with the man unconscious on the rocks. Cutter Hale heard the scuffle. He turned, his pistol drawn. "Who is there?" He saw Ashki, a shadow rising over the fallen men. Cutter fired. The bullet sparked off the rock where Ashki had been. "Now, Eliza!" Ashki roared, diving for cover as Cutter fired again. Eliza ran. She ran straight toward Cutter Hale, who was fumbling to reload, his eyes on Ashki. She reached the lantern he had set on the ground. She ripped open the packet of magnesium and threw the fine, gray powder directly onto the open flame. The world vanished in a silent, agonizing blast of white. It was brighter than the sun, a pure, chemical fire that seared the retinas. Cutter screamed, dropping his pistol, his hands flying to his face. "I cannot see, I am blind." Eliza had thrown herself flat, her own eyes squeezed shut. Ashki did not wait. He launched himself across the open ground and slammed into Cutter, sending both men crashing against the wet timbers of the sluice gate. And then the sky tore open. The building storm, held back for an hour, broke with the flash. A crack of thunder, deafening and close, shook the ground. Rain did not fall. It descended in a solid, driving sheet. Eliza scrambled to her feet, blinded by the afterimage of the flash, soaked in seconds. She heard a sound, a low, terrible groan. It was not the thunder, it was the earth. "Eliza, the wall!" Tom the blacksmith was yelling from the ridge. "The dynamite!" Cutter Hale, rolling in the mud, his vision a blur of swimming spots, had found what he was looking for. The fuse. He had a match from his pocket, striking it against the rock. "If I cannot have it, no one will!" he shrieked, and he touched the match to the fuse. The fuse was wet. It sputtered, hissing, the flame struggling. "Ashki, the fuse!" Eliza screamed, scrambling toward him. Ashki saw it. He kicked at Cutter's hand, but the man was crazed. He shielded the fuse with his body. The damaged sluice gate, battered by the new rain, chose that moment to give way. With a crack of splintering pine, the main timber beneath Eliza's feet shifted, collapsing. The ground fell away. Eliza cried out, grabbing for a hold. Her satchel, heavy with the glass plate, swung loose, pulling her off balance. She was sliding, falling into the new, churning torrent of the creek. Ashki, he was there. He had abandoned Cutter and lunged for her. His hand closed around her wrist, a vice-like grip, just as her feet swung free over the rushing water. She was dangling, the water tearing at her boots. Ashki, her only anchor, her satchel, her precious proof, slipped from her other shoulder. "The plate!" she screamed, making a desperate grab for it. She caught the strap, but the jolt almost tore her from Ashki's grip. "Hold on," he grunted, his muscles straining, his boots sliding in the mud. He was holding her, and she was holding the satchel. Below them, Cutter Hale laughed, a wild, bubbling sound. "It is too late." The fuse, though wet, had burned just far enough. The explosion was not the roar they had expected. It was a dull, wet thump. The charge, soaked by the downpour, had only half detonated. But it was enough. It did not bring the cliff down. It cracked the canyon wall, splitting the new earthwork dam that Barlow's men had built. A fresh torrent of mud, rock, and debris began to slide. A thick, semi-solid river. It was not heading for the creek. It was heading, slow and unstoppable, directly toward the low-lying plain of the Red Willow Valley, toward the sacred burial grounds. "My ancestors," Ashki said, his voice a whisper of agony. He was holding Eliza. Below them, Cutter Hale was scrambling away in the darkness, and the mud was moving. "Ashki," Eliza said, her voice shaking. She looked from the sliding mud to her satchel, which held the plate, the proof. "Pull me up. We have to stop him." Ashki looked at the mudslide. He looked at her. He made the choice. He hauled her up, his arm around her waist, setting her on solid ground. "The proof!" Eliza panted, clutching the satchel. "We have to get the proof to the hearing." "The hearing will not matter if the valley is gone," he said. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the sluice. The explosion had shattered the main structure, but the control ropes for the old irrigation channels were still there, tangled in the debris. This was the moment, the moral choice. Save the evidence or save the land. Eliza looked at Ashki. She saw the torment in his face, and she remembered their promise. "I will not sell you for my career." He would not trade her for the water, and she would not trade his home for her story. "We save the valley," she said, dropping the satchel with the plate safely on high ground. "We save your home. Tell me what to do." A look of profound, fierce gratitude passed over his face. "The water needs a new path, away from the graves." He pointed. "That wheel it controls the old diversion gate. If you can turn it, it will open the western ditch." He drew his knife and waded into the churning water, toward the tangle of ropes. "Tom Cole," Eliza screamed. "Help me!" The blacksmith and the young pastor came sliding down the muddy bank. "Turn it!" Eliza yelled, putting her shoulder to the heavy, rain-slicked wheel. The three of them pushed. The wheel was stuck, jammed with mud and debris. "Together!" Tom roared. They heaved, their muscles straining. The wheel groaned, turned an inch, then stuck. In the creek, Ashki was working with frantic speed, slashing at the tangled ropes. He was trying to free the main barrier, to use it to steer the flood. The mudslide was getting closer, a creeping wall of death. "It is not enough," Eliza cried, her hands raw. "We cannot move it." Ashki looked up. He saw them failing. He saw the mud. He plunged his knife into the main support rope, a thick hemp cable, and began to saw. It was a regulator, meant to keep the barrier from moving too quickly. If he cut it, the barrier would be free. It would either save them or be torn away completely. He cut. The rope snapped with a sound like a rifle shot. The heavy wooden barrier, freed from its restraint, slammed down, caught by the current. The force of it threw Ashki from his feet, sending him under the brown water. "Ashki!" Eliza screamed. The barrier, now loose, swung in the current, hitting the bank. It created a new channel. The main force of the creek, now diverted, slammed into the sliding mud. The two forces met with a roar. The water, channeled by the barrier, began to scythe away the base of the mudslide, pushing it, turning it, forcing it back toward the railroad cut. Ashki surfaced, gasping, clinging to a rock. He was alive. On the bank, the wheel, its pressure suddenly released, spun free. Eliza, Tom, and Cole fell back as the western ditch opened. The flood was diverted. The water and mud, now joined, roared away from the valley, away from the graves, pouring harmlessly into the deep arroyo to the west. They had done it. Eliza ran to the bank, her hand outstretched. "Ashki, take my hand." He grabbed her arm, and she and Tom pulled him, soaked and shivering, from the torrent. They stood on the bank, panting in the dying rain, looking at the chaos. The sluice gate was destroyed. The dynamite was spent, and the valley was safe. "The evidence," Eliza said, her voice trembling. "The sluice gate." Ashki pointed. The main component of the gate, the heavy timber with the wheel mechanism, the very piece Barlow's men had labored over, had been torn free. It was now wedged, intact, between two boulders, 50 yards downstream. They had saved the valley, and the flood had saved the proof. The sun was high and brutal, baking the mud of the previous night's storm into a hard, cracked shell. By noon, the main street of Dry Cedar was packed. It was not a mob. Not anymore. The fury of the morning had cooled into a tense, profound curiosity. This was a hearing. This was a reckoning. On the steps of the general store, a temporary table had been placed. Behind it sat the county commissioner, a stern-looking man named Wallace who had ridden in from Prescott, his face unreadable. Beside him, looking pale and diminished, sat Reverend Gideon and the saloon proprietor. Silas Barlow stood to the side, clean, pressed, and confident, flanked by the deputy, who wore his pistol high on his hip. Then they arrived. Eliza Hart, Ashki Nez, Tom the blacksmith, the young Reverend Cole, and the widow, Mrs. Tobin. They were not clean. They were streaked with mud, their clothes torn, their faces etched with exhaustion from the night's work. They looked like the survivors of a war. Commissioner Wallace banged a gavel on the table. This public hearing is called to order. It was called by Miss Eliza Hart and Mr. Tom. He looked at Eliza. Miss Hart, you have made significant claims. The floor is yours. Eliza stepped forward. She carried her satchel. The square was dead silent. We are here, she began, her voice clear and carrying in the dry air, because a man named Liam Tobin was murdered. She gestured to Mrs. Tobin, who stood beside her, a small, black-clad figure of absolute conviction. His wife, Mrs. Tobin, will tell you why. He was killed because he was an honest man. He discovered a ghost payroll. He discovered that his employer, Silas Barlow, was billing the railroad for 50 men while only paying 30. He was killed by Mr. Barlow's enforcer, a man named Cutter Hale. Objection, Barlow shouted. This is slander. She has no proof. She has this, Tom the blacksmith said. He stepped forward and threw a heavy, spiked horseshoe onto the table. It rang like a bell. I made that. Commissioner, I made a full set just like it for Cutter Hale's horse. And I found the tracks from those shoes, leading from Liam Tobin's body, back to Mr. Barlow's land. I will swear to it on my forge. The crowd murmured. This was Tom. This was not a stranger. Mr. Barlow did not just steal money, Eliza continued, her voice rising. He stole your water. She spoke of the illegal sluice. She described the photograph she had taken. He knew we had the proof, and so, last night, he sent Cutter Hale to destroy it, not just the sluice. He sent him with dynamite to destroy the entire canyon wall, to flood the Red Willow Valley, to wipe the evidence and Mr. Ashke's ancestors from the map. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was an escalation they had not imagined. He is a lunatic, Barlow yelled. She is hysterical. There is no sluice gate. The storm washed it away. He is right, Eliza said, her voice dropping. The storm did wash it away. It washed it here. She nodded. From the alley beside the smithy, Tom and 3 other men appeared, hauling the main component of the sluice gate. It was a massive, 10-foot timber, splintered and muddy. The iron wheel mechanism still attached. They dropped it in the dust in front of the steps with a heavy, final thud. It was an undeniable, physical fact. And finally, Eliza said, this. She pulled the cloth-wrapped glass plate from her satchel. She held it up to the sun. A photograph. The truth. Captured in light. It shows Silas Barlow. It shows Cutter Hale. It shows the rifles. And it shows that very mechanism. She pointed at the wreckage. He did not just steal, he murdered. And he waged a private war to cover his tracks. The commissioner stared at the sluice. He looked at Tom. He looked at Eliza. Mr. Ashke Nez, do you wish to speak? Ashke stepped forward. He wore no weapons. His arms were crossed. He looked not at the commissioner, but at the crowd, at the ranchers, the farmers, the women. We do not own the water, he said, his voice calm and deep. We are stewards. The Dine law is the same as the law of the land. The spring feeds all, the deer, the cattle, the corn, the town. He turned his gaze to Barlow. When one man builds a dam, he makes all men thirst. This is the only law. Silas Barlow broke it. He broke it for greed. He is a man who would burn the world to warm his own hands. Barlow's face was purple. He saw the crowd, their faces no longer hostile, but full of doubt, of suspicion. He had lost the facts. He had only one weapon left. He ripped a copy of the Cedar Gazette from his pocket, the one from that morning, and held it high. Law, he roared, his voice cracking with fury. You will listen to this savage speak of law. This is their law. He pointed at the lurid drawing. The law of the brothel. The law of the savage who defiles our women. He stabbed a finger at Eliza. This woman, this wanted fugitive, she is his whore. She came here. She spread her legs for him, and together they have spun this fantasy, this filth to destroy me, to destroy dry cedar. He turned to the crowd, his eyes blazing. Are you going to let them? Are you going to let a savage and his harlot take your water, take your future? They are the danger. I say we run them out. We run them all out. And we claim that water for ourselves, as is our right. The poison worked. The crowd, already on edge, began to shout. The old fear, the old hatred, it was all there. He is right, someone yelled. Run them out, hang them. The deputy smiled, his hand on his gun. Barlow was winning. He is lying. The voice was quiet, shaking, but it cut through the noise. Reverend Cole, the young pastor, stepped forward. He looked at Reverend Gideon. I stood by you. I was silent. I let you use the pulpit of God to spread this man's hate, and it was a sin. He turned to the crowd. I was there last night, at the railroad cut. I saw the dynamite. I saw Cutter Hale light the fuse. I saw them. He pointed to Eliza and Ashki. Risk their lives, not for a story, but to save the valley, to save the graves. Everything she has said is the truth. I saw it with my own eyes. So did I. Tom the blacksmith boomed, standing beside him. And I know he killed my husband. The widow, Mrs. Tobin, cried, her small voice a shriek of pain. The crowd was split, a wave of confusion and anger. Their own people were standing as witnesses. It is a conspiracy, Barlow screamed, his composure finally breaking. They are all liars. You have no proof, no hard proof. But I do. The voice was a whisper. A small man, clutching a hat in his trembling hands, pushed his way through the crowd. He wore spectacles and a green visor. He was shaking from head to toe. It was Jeremiah Finch, the railroad accountant. Finch, Barlow hissed. Get back to your office. What is the meaning of this? Finch looked at Barlow, then at Mrs. Tobin, and tears began to stream down his face. I cannot, Mr. Barlow, I cannot. He looked at the commissioner. Liam Tobin, he was my friend. He was a good man. I was a coward. I kept the other set of books, the real ones. I was afraid. He unbuttoned his coat and pulled out a thick, black ledger. He held it out with a shaking hand. But when I heard what they did last night, at the creek, with the dynamite, no more. He placed the ledger on the table. It is all here, sir, he said to the commissioner. The ghost payroll, the false invoices, the payments to Cutter Hale, thousands of dollars. It is all here. The square was silent. The only sound was the flutter of a page as Commissioner Wallace opened the ledger. He read one page. He read another. His face was granite. He looked up. Deputy, arrest Mr. Barlow on charges of federal embezzlement, conspiracy, and suspicion of murder. The deputy's face was ashen. He looked at Barlow. He looked at the ledger. He looked at the crowd. He was trapped. Sir, I looked for your name, too, deputy, Jeremiah Finch whispered, not looking at him. It is in there. Page 72, security consultation, $500, paid 2 weeks ago. The deputy stopped breathing. He was exposed. Arrest them both, the commissioner roared. Standing up, arrest them now. A shot. The sound was flat, sharp. It did not come from the deputy. It came from the roof of the saloon. Cutter Hale was standing there, his face a mask of primal rage. He had escaped the flood, and he had come back for his revenge. He was holding a rifle. He was aiming it at Eliza. You, he screamed, his voice cracking. You ruined me. You ruined everything. He fired. Ashki did not move to save Eliza. He had seen Hale a second before the shot. He had shoved Eliza, sending her sprawling to the ground. The bullet splintered the post where she had been standing. Hale was fumbling to reload, enraged. Ashki vaulted onto the boardwalk. The deputy was fumbling for his own pistol, stunned. Ashki grabbed the deputy's arm, the one holding the gun, and shoved him toward the street. "Do your job." But Ashki did not wait. He grabbed the porch post, swung himself up, and was on the low roof in 3 seconds. Hale spun, bringing the rifle around. Ashki was on him. It was not a fight. It was a conclusion. He met the rifle, twisted it from Hale's grip with a sharp crack of bone. The gun clattered to the street. Ashki did not strike him. He grabbed Hale by the front of his shirt, hauled him to his feet, and dragged him to the edge of the roof. He held him there, dangling, helpless, over the silent crowd. "This," Ashki shouted, his voice ringing across the square, "is Barlow's law." He did not drop him. With a grunt of effort, he hauled him back, bound his hands with Hale's own belt, and shoved him toward the ladder. "Go, face your hearing." Silence. The entire town had seen the truth. Commissioner Wallace stood. "This hearing is over." He pointed to Tom and to another steady-looking man in the crowd. "Tom, Mr. Abernathy, you are hereby deputized. You will take these 3 men," he pointed to Barlow, "Hale, and the disgraced deputy, and you will lock them in the jail. You will lock them separately. They will await the federal marshal." He turned to the crowd. "By the authority of the Arizona Territory, the contract of Silas Barlow is nullified. His assets and his bank accounts are frozen, pending a full audit." He looked at Finch, who was weeping silently. "Mr. Finch, you are a very brave man. You will be held as a material witness for the government. You will be protected." Finally, he looked at Eliza, who was getting to her feet, brushing off the dust, and at Ashki, who stood beside her. "The petition to remove the dine is denied. The warrant for Miss Eliza Hart is withdrawn, effective immediately. The Red Willow Spring and its valley are declared a protected zone under shared community stewardship, pending a permanent federal treaty. This town and the Dayan elders will form a council. You will manage the water. Together." He banged his gavel. "This hearing is adjourned." The federal marshal arrived on the afternoon train. A quiet, professional man who read the ledger, looked at the evidence, and spoke in low tones to Commissioner Wallace. He did not put Silas Barlow and Cutter Hale in the town jail. He put them in irons and secured them in the baggage car for the return trip to Prescott. The disgraced deputy, stripped of his badge, went with them. Dry Cedar watched them go. The town square, which had been the scene of a hearing that felt like a battle, was now just a street. The silence they left behind was profound. Tom, the blacksmith, his face grim, walked to the front of the Last Chance saloon. He reached up, tore down the last remaining mud-stained poster of the Cedar Gazette, and crumpled it in his fist. He tossed it into a trash barrel, and that was the end of that. Eliza Hart sat in the telegraph office, the clatter of the key a familiar, comforting sound. She was writing. She was not writing for Mr. Davies. She was writing for the truth and for the record. She wrote for hours. She told the story from the beginning: the missing worker, the ghost payroll, the man with the lightning tattoo. She described the grooved horseshoes and the testimony of the widow. She wrote about the theft of the water, the greed that drove Barlow to dynamite, and the final, desperate fight at the railroad cut. And she wrote about the alliance. She wrote of a Dine warrior who chose law over violence, a blacksmith who chose truth over safety, a young pastor who chose conscience over doctrine, and a widow who found her voice. She wrote about a community that had been poisoned by lies and had chosen, in the end, to heal itself with the facts. It was the longest dispatch she had ever written, and it was the best. The healing began, as the trouble had, with the water. 2 days later, the first meeting of the new Water Stewardship Council was held. It was not held in the church or the saloon. It was held in the open air, under the cottonwoods by Red Willow Spring. Commissioner Wallace was there. Tom represented the town's business. Reverend Cole represented the church. Mrs. Tobin and Jeremiah Finch were there. as public witnesses. And from the valley, Ashki's uncle came, with Ashki at his side. It was awkward. The townsfolk stood on one side of the creek, the dean on the other. But Tom, the blacksmith, walked across the shallow water and held out his hand to Ashki's uncle. The elder looked at him, then took his hand. They talked for hours. They did not talk of blame. They talked of the drought. They talked of how many cattle the land could support. They talked of the needs of the cornfields and the needs of the horses. Jeremiah Finch, now acting as secretary, wrote it all down in a new, clean ledger. By sunset, they had the first lines of a written agreement. It was not a treaty. It was a promise made between neighbors. Eliza watched it all, her heart full. She had not photographed it. Some things, she was learning, were not meant to be captured. They were meant to be felt. She returned to the telegraph office to find the reply from Mr. Davies. It was short. Where is the scandal? This is dry. Law, water, community. Nobody cares. I wanted the savage and the harlot. You are fired. Eliza read the words. A month ago. They would have destroyed her. She would have felt her career, her identity, her entire future crumble to dust. She looked at the yellow paper. She felt light. She was not fired. She was free. She had her integrity, she had her story, and she had the glass plate. She walked back to the telegraph office, took her long dispatch, and addressed it to the Arizona Territorial in Prescott. She paid for it with the last of her money. A strange thing happened. The story that Mr. Davies called dry was, to the rest of the territory, a thunderclap. The Territorial ran it on the front page. The Dry Cedar Water War Greed, murder, and a community stand. A paper in Santa Fe picked it up, then one in Denver. Within 2 weeks, a reporter from the San Francisco Examiner was on the train, coming to interview the woman who broke the Barlow ring. Eliza was sitting in the smithy, cleaning the mud from the salvaged components of her camera, when the telegraph operator, Sam, ran in, waving a piece of paper. It is from Boston, he said, his eyes wide. From the Ledger. She took it. It was from Davies. Excellent work on the Barlow story. Knew you had it in you. Keep writing. The Ledger will pay. Davies. Eliza laughed. She crumpled the telegram and tossed it into the forge, watching the paper curl and blacken. She would keep writing, but not for him. That night, the air was clean. The last of the storm clouds had moved east, leaving the sky a fathomless, dark velvet, pierced by 1,000,000 stars. The moon was rising, casting the Red Willow Valley in silver and shadow. Eliza was at the spring. She had come to listen to the water, now running clear and steady. She was not alone. Ashki was there, sitting on a flat rock, watching the moon rise. He had been waiting for her. She sat, not beside him, but near, leaving a respectful space. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the night sounds, the crickets, the call of a distant owl, the soft splash of the spring. I am not running any more, she said, her voice quiet. He turned his head to look at her. I remember the promise. In the sod hut, we said we would not run from this feeling. I was not sure if the feeling was real. She admitted, or if it was just the storm, the fear. The storm, he said, his voice low, shows you what is real. It strips away the rest. He moved, sliding from his rock to sit on the grass beside her. He took her hand, the one he had bandaged in a ruined hotel room. The gash was healing, a long pink scar against her skin. He traced it with his thumb. His touch was rough, but gentle. You were the first person here who listened to me, she whispered, not looking at him, but at the stars. Everyone else, they looked at me. They saw a woman, an intruder, a curiosity, a harlot. You heard what I was saying. You listened. And you, he said, were the first person from the town who saw. You did not look at the valley and see grazing land. You did not look at the water and see money. You looked at the earth, and you read the story. You heard its voice. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It felt solid, real. He was not a symbol. He was not a savage. He was a man, warm and strong and quiet. He put his arm around her, pulling her close. It was not the desperate grab in the storm. It was not the frantic, life-saving grip at the sluice. It was an embrace. It was an answer. My editor, he fired me. Then he hired me back, she said, a small, dry laugh in her throat. He wants me to keep writing. And will you? I will. But not for him. I am staying. Dry Cedar. It needs a newspaper. A real one. One that tells the truth. She turned her face, looking up at him. This is my home now. If you will have me. He looked down at her. His face, in the moonlight, was serious and kind. This was always your home, Eliza Hart. You just had to find it. He lowered his head. His lips met hers. It was not the brief, desperate pact in the cave. This was a kiss of knowing. It was slow and deep and full of a shared, quiet understanding. It was a promise, a commitment made under the stars, of two people who had seen the truth and had chosen it. They held each other, the sound of the spring and their own breathing the only sounds in the world. The next morning, the valley was bright. Ashki's cousin, Nighthorse, was walking by the spring, his ribs still bound, but his step steady. He saw Eliza with Ashki. He stopped. He did not smile, but he inclined his head in a gesture of profound respect. The wounds were healing. Ashki took Eliza to the place where the mudslide had been. The earth was still scarred, a raw patch of brown, but at the edges, where the water had receded, she saw it, tiny, vibrant, impossible spears of green grass pushing up through the mud. The land heals. Ashki said. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small, tightly braided loop of black horsehair. My people give this as a sign of trust. It is a bond. It is strong. It will not break. He pressed it into her hand. I have something for you, too, she said. She had gone back to Dr. Miller, had used his chemicals and the clear light of the sun. She had made a print. She handed it to him. It was the photograph, the one from the glass plate, the frozen moment of the crime Barlow. Hale, the rifles, the sluice, the truth. He took it, studying it. This is a strong thing, a memory that does not change. That is the proof, she said, but this is the truth. She handed him a second print. It was the one she had forgotten she had, a plate she had taken that very first day, before her camera was destroyed. It was a simple, beautiful photograph of the Red Willow Spring, the morning light hitting the water, the cottonwoods reflected in its clear surface. He looked at it for a long time. This, he said, his voice quiet. This is what we saved. She went back to the smithy. Tom was at the anvil, but he was not shoeing a horse. He was working on something small. I am no carpenter, he said, not looking up. And I am no lens grinder. He turned. He was holding her camera, or what was left of it. The lens, miraculously, had not been shattered. It was only the box that had been smashed. Tom had built a new one. It was not the fine, polished mahogany from Boston. It was made of rough, sturdy pine, the corners reinforced with dull, hammered steel from his forge. It was heavy and scarred and ugly. It is not pretty, he said, pushing it toward her. It is beautiful, Eliza said, touching the metal. It is strong, anyway. Tom said, it is made of this town. I figure we all needed some rebuilding. Eliza took the camera. It was heavier than before, solid. She lifted it, aimed the lens, and looked through the glass at the town of Dry Cedar. She saw it clearly. Her town, her home. She was ready to work. The trials in Prescott were a formality, a simple, declarative end to the nightmare. With Jeremiah Finch's ledger opened as federal evidence, Silas Barlow's fate was sealed. The jury, composed of ranchers and merchants who understood water and money, listened for 3 days. They heard the widow Tobin's story, her small, clear voice unwavering. They heard Tom the blacksmith describe the horseshoes. They saw the glass plate photograph, projected large by a federal marshal. Barlow was convicted on all counts: federal embezzlement, conspiracy, and accessory to the murder of Liam Tobin. He received a sentence of 30 years in the territorial prison. He was ruined, a ghost in his own right, his name erased from the railroad contracts he had built with fraud. Cutter Hale, facing the gallows, confessed to everything. He traded his testimony against Barlow for a life sentence. He would die in prison, his lightning tattoo fading on his aging hand. A man who had sold his soul for money he never got to spend. The railroad, humiliated by the national press Eliza's articles had generated, moved swiftly. An internal audit exposed the corruption that had allowed Barlow to operate. The money was repaid. A new, stricter oversight team arrived in Dry Cedar, this time treating the water agreement not as a nuisance, but as binding law. In Dry Cedar, the wound began to close. The Red Willow Stewardship Act was signed. It was not a grand federal treaty, but a simple, handwritten document penned by Jeremiah Finch, who had found his courage and was now the town's acting administrator. It laid out the terms for sharing the water, the seasons for grazing, the limits for all. It was signed by Ashki's uncle, his hand firm, and by Tom, representing the town. It was witnessed by Reverend Cole. It was a promise built not on ideals, but on the hard, shared ground of survival. Eliza stayed. The dust, the red grit she had once fought, was part of her now. She used the inheritance she had once fled, the money from the Boston Bank, and bought the failed office of the Cedar Gazette. She had the sign taken down. She painted a new one herself, in simple, strong, black letters, the Dry Cedar Voice. Her first issue was printed on a second-hand press she had freighted in from Santa Fe. It was not an easy life. She was the editor, the reporter, the typesetter, but it was her own. She did more than write. She had found a new calling, born from the children who had started to follow her, their suspicion replaced by a shy curiosity. On Saturdays, she held a class. She gathered the children from the town and the children from the valley, who now came and went freely. She had ordered 6 small, simple box cameras. She taught them how to see. "Look," she would say, holding one of the cameras, her own heavy, steel-braced camera resting nearby. "You are not just capturing a picture. You are telling a story. Do not just see the person. See the light in their eyes. Do not just see the land. See the story it is telling you." She was teaching them to listen with their eyes. Ashki's life changed as well. He was no longer just a guardian, defending his borders. He was a bridge. He was respected. After the hearing, the elders had asked him to be their voice to the town. He, too, began to teach. The young men from the town, the ones who had once been part of the mob, came to him. They wanted to learn. He taught them to ride, not with the harsh bits and spurs of the cattle drive, but with balance and hands. He took them into the high canyons and taught them to read the earth. "You look, but you do not see," he would say, stopping his horse. "You see the dust. I see the path of a fox. You see a broken branch. I see a deer that passed this way an hour ago." He was teaching them to see the world as a living thing, not a thing to be broken. He was teaching them respect. Their own lives found a new, quiet rhythm. It was a life woven together, a shared purpose that needed few words. They met in the evenings, when the work was done. One night, she found him by the Red Willow Spring. Under the great cottonwood, he was working, smoothing the last edge of a long, simple bench he had built from the salvaged pine of the old sluice gate. It was strong, sturdy, and permanent. He had placed it facing the water, in the exact spot where they had first truly heard each other. She sat beside him, the wood was smooth and warm. They watched the moon rise, casting the valley in silver light. "It is a good bench," she said. "It is a good place to listen," he replied. They sat in that shared silence, his shoulder against hers. Eliza thought of her life in Boston. She had come west seeking freedom. She had thought freedom was a loud noise, a rebellion, a train ticket, a defiant flash of magnesium. She looked at Ashki, his strong hands resting on his knees, his profile calm and certain against the moonlight. She realized her mistake. Freedom was not a shout. It was the quiet, patient, difficult work of being heard. It was the profound relief of finally, truly, listening to another. And justice, she had learned, was not just the dramatic verdict in a courtroom. Justice was Jeremiah Finch's trembling hand, holding a ledger. It was Tom's hammer, building a new camera. It was Ashki's arm, pulling her from the flood. Justice was the hard, unseen, necessary thing you did in the dark, when no one else was looking. The future did not stop. It simply opened. A letter arrived for Eliza, bearing a New York postmark. It was from a publisher. They had seen her dispatches, reprinted in the Examiner. They were formally offering her an advance to create a book of her photographs, a chronicle of the people and the land of the Arizona Territory. They had already proposed a title, Waters of the West. A week later, Commissioner Wallace rode into Dry Cedar. He did not come for a hearing. He came to find Ashki. The Red Willow Stewardship Act was a success. It was being studied in Prescott, in Tucson. Other counties, facing the same conflicts over land and water, were looking for a new way. They are forming an inter-county water committee, Wallace explained, to write the rules for the whole territory. They need a voice that understands the land. They need a voice for the tribes. They need you, Mr. Nez. He was no longer a renegade warrior. He was a statesman. They both knew this was not an ending. It was the hard, hopeful beginning of the rest of their lives. That evening, they walked together, away from the town, away from the settlement, to the edge of the high meadows. The air was clear. The scars on the land from the dynamite, from the mud, were healing. They were covered now in a fine, bright carpet of new grass. Ashki's herd of horses, the ones he had fought for, grazed freely. They moved down to the spring. They were not afraid. They stepped into the clear, running water of Red Willow Creek, their coats shining in the last light of the sun. Eliza watched the water. It flowed, pure and clean, over the deep red stones that formed the creek bed. The water washed the rocks, making the color stand out, vibrant and true. The water was clean. The land was healing. The red dust had finally, truly, settled. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please share your thoughts and where you are in the comments below. We can all connect and share our ideas. Please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Like this video. And if you can, support us further by hitting the hype button. It helps this story reach more listeners.